the first slide in our product review deck is our eval scorecard. The reason it's first is not only because we need to talk about it every week or 2 weeks or whatever, but also because it's a message to the team of, honestly, nothing else matters. If your product does not reliably serve the use cases that you've promised. So it's very helpful to have that. And we usually follow that up with a couple slides that actually bring some color to it. For example, it could be that, hey, your overall, score, whatever, is at 63%. But if you break that down, you're actually rocking it on one subset of your use cases, but you have a long way to go on another.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Deployed. I'm excited to have Kelly Schaefer from Google on the show today. Kelly is a product director in Google Labs, and with her teams, she gets to spend her time building cool new stuff with generative AI. That's literally their charter. They've built NotebookLM, which you probably heard of, Jules, the coding agent, Stitch, the UI generation application that they launched recently, and a bunch of other stuff, dozens of projects. But this conversation is great. It goes from very high level strategy, how Kelly thinks about product development and running teams, down to just some of the best brass tacks, detailed advice that we've had from anybody on the show about how to do evals, how to think about metrics, how to hill climb to quality with AI applications, just a bunch of other practical things that will be interesting to anyone building in this space. So with that, we'll jump in. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, everybody. I'm joined here today with Kelly Schaefer at Google Labs. I'm excited to have a conversation with her about what they're building, and I'm going to just let her get started. So, Kelly, thank you for joining Deployed and talking to everybody about what you're building. I know people are going to be excited to learn from your experience. So maybe you can just start, for people who don't know you, give us a quick intro, who you are, what's your backstory. Love to hear just kind of the journey you've been on, and let you tell people in your words why we're talking today.
Yeah, sounds great. And Ian, thanks so much for having me, because I'm a free play fan, and it's especially fun to be able to be on the podcast instead of just listening. So a little bit about me. I'm a product director at a group in Google called Google Labs, and I lead a portfolio of early stage new products. So they're all AI enabled, and we have at any given time a pretty wide set of things that we're exploring. And then a subset of them, of course, launch, and then a subset of those become successful. So I'm sure we'll talk a lot about those later. In terms of me and how I got into this role, I think if you think of my career in terms of themes, it's pretty straightforward of how I got here. If you think of my actual path, it feels extremely wandering, as I'm sure a lot of folks
I can relate to that too.
Yep.
I have an English major. I don't know why I'm here, but I know the feeling.
Yeah. I definitely would not have anticipated this. And actually, I would say that for just about every job I've taken, I felt like, oh gosh, I'm a real novice at that thing. I wonder how this will go. But yeah, I have tried to stick towards things that are really entrepreneurial, that are cross-disciplinary, mostly just because I think that's the most fun. And then I'm a very business-minded person, so I love kind of keeping my eye on the prize of, are we actually building a true business here? Is this thing worth paying for? How do our customers feel about this? What's driving them nuts? And yeah, it's been really fun at Google. Other stuff I've done in the past, done everything from Bain Consulting to working at IDEO to a couple of my own startups. I was at Stripe for a while, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, for this AI stuff, just got really energized by the way that it's going to transform how we work in particular. And so excited to talk with you about that.
Did you get into working on AI? Where in your journey did that happen?
So depends how you classify AI, because I think for probably for you and me and a bunch of folks, AI has been around for a really long time in many forms. So I've worked on that certainly at Stripe, in addition to doing a bunch of stuff on the enterprise side and the P&L side. Have the fraud team, so they're doing a bunch of ML all the time. That counts as AI. In terms of LLMs, though, got into it when I joined Google and just started seeing the power of some of this stuff. And it was a little funny, to be honest, that we had started in labs. My group and some of our other groups in labs had started working on a bunch of LLM related projects. products long before I think it was kind of commonplace. And so, in a way, when the zeitgeist suddenly, followed that, it was
Yeah.
honestly a bit odd because there was this moment where we were like, oh, we didn't know we were one of the cool kids, working on the cool thing. But I guess now everyone cares about this. So that was fun.
You all have a fun journey that way. It's been interesting talking to some folks at Google. You're like, what was your first experience with LLMs? And they're like, when was the Transformer paper published? So you all got to be a little bit ahead. Tell us more about labs. Just, I think, I've even said this to you separately for people that don't work within Google. I think people on the outside are always trying to figure out, like, how do the pieces fit together? Um, just give us a bit more of a sense about, like, just kind of what's your charter? What are you all working on? Like, how do you decide what to work on? I'm sure people will be interested.
Okay, so official charter is that Labs' mission is to discover and deliver new AI products that advance Google's mission. But like, what does that actually mean, right? So
Cool.
basically, what it means is we are a very exploratory group that builds in public and is thinking about, hey, what are the next generation of AI-enabled products that we think Google should really put out in the world? But those products might not actually be that related to some of our billion user products today. And gosh, it's pretty hard to incubate these like teeny tiny things that at first can frankly just be a cute demo and build those alongside, some of the major feature improvements for our billion user products. So that's kind of where Labs was born. We have a very close relationship with a group that I call GDM, which stands for Google DeepMind. And that group is a research group, but I think of us as kind of like best buddies with Google DeepMind because we work with them really closely on a lot of our products and also kind of take a peek at a bunch of their pipeline of what are some of the new model improvements coming, how might that change what types of products could even be built in the first place, what are new things that are suddenly going from mediocre quality to high quality that all of a sudden we can use in more of like a work context. So that's been really fun and very complimentary. So I would say for almost all of our teams in labs, we kind of are in a handshake setup with the GDM. And then I'd say the other thing to know about kind of how it works at Google, and of course it's a large, complex org, so don't take just
Yep.
my perspective on it. But I really think that it's very helpful to have a place that, like labs, that's the combination of building prototypes, but also legitimately taking it to market and turning it into a business. And or in general tend to be good at one or the other. So, one of my initial questions when I first joined Labs, which was started by a mentor of mine named Clay Bavor, was, hey, is this going to be a situation where we're making a bunch of demos, but and everyone thinks they're cool, but we haven't actually launched products? And the whole ethos from the beginning was like, let's take it all the way. Otherwise, they can get, just kind of lost in the ether, even if they're really promising.
Yeah, this is how I've thought about you all from the outside of, like, the practical applied AI R&D lab. For sure, it's cool to hear you talk about, like, maybe the added perspective of trying to make this a real business to, like, figure out how to make it work. I know, like, to talk about some of the projects that people might have heard of if they don't know labs generally, like NotebookLM, congrats, you exploded on the internet, a few months ago. And, I think that's an interesting one to hear about, because I think probably myself included, like, looking in from the outside and asking what's the business model, to your point, is probably an interesting one to hear you talk about. But maybe you could just, like, walk us through that story, like, for anyone who's not familiar, like, what was NotebookLM, or is it still, like, what's the reception been? It would be just cool to hear what that was like for you all.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so for folks who aren't familiar with it, NotebookLM, we think of a little tongue in cheek as your brain's best friend. And it's really a thinking partner for you. And so, practically, what you can do is you can share a bunch of sources with NotebookLM. So, maybe it's your strategy paper for your company, maybe it's a bunch of YouTube videos from your favorite, business DeepMind, and there's all sorts of different sources you can upload, and then you can interact with it in a really grounded way. So instead of just kind of opining generally on a topic, it can use those sources to really ground its answer in the material that you care about. So we started with, just very basic Q&A, but the thing that helped us really take off was this thing called audio overviews, which you can think of as like a podcast like kind of share about your sources. Let me like back up to when it first started, because this actually is very much in line with what you were asking about. Why does labs exist and what does labs do? It actually started as kind of like a 20% project for an engineer that was in labs. It was literally just him. The guy's name is Adam. He's amazing. The project started with a very descriptive name, which was talk to small corpus, which basically meant, hey, if you have a small corpus of information, how might you talk with that? Not the name we launched with, yeah, not the official brand. And at first, it was just a kind of janky collab where you could interact with it, and it both seemed like a toy at first, which a lot of things start off just seeming as a like a cool thing. But it also really captured people's imagination and also solved a problem at the time where, gosh, these chatbots are just kind of going off on random tangents, not necessarily, all that factual back in the day. And this is actually pulling from the information that I care about. And so that felt very novel. And then from there, obviously, there was a ton of work and some amazing folks who turned it into a full product. You asked about the reception, which is really interesting because Notebook, since last fall or so, has really taken off and just has just way more users than we ever expected.
Yeah.
Also, for the beginning period of Notebook, it didn't have a lot of users. And that's something that we also had to learn from of, hey, when you bring something new to the world, even if it feels novel and exciting, you're not necessarily going to get millions and millions and millions of people using it on day one. And so it's interesting to see how kind of us chipping away, especially at quality and some of the user experience, made us ready that when we launched audio overviews, which really captured people's imagination, the product itself was ready to absorb that many people. And that was definitely a lesson for me and something that we keep in mind within labs, that you're not always going to have that hit on day one, but it's like how you kind of listen to users over time and incrementally improve that will win.
I know the way that I discovered it. I'm not sure when it was, but I bet this is when most people did, was the podcast back and forth use case of
Yep.
just auto generate a podcast about my data.
The funny thing about that, one of the first things that we heard from folks, and I say this a little tongue in cheek, but it mattered to us, was we would hear things like, oh, thank God for NotebookLM. I just uploaded the most boring paper and it explained it to me in a really entertaining and funny way. Or I was supposed to read this really long thing that my manager sent me and I forgot. And now I got the download in 5 minutes. And it's funny because it's also used for a whole bunch of very like research oriented purposes. But this idea that it makes things like way more digestible has really been magic for us. And I still use it all the time for a bunch of those use cases as well.
Yeah, the voice format, I feel like that was part of its success too. Looking in from the outside, was like there hadn't been a lot of great voice AI use cases, and it's such a good medium. And I heard somebody else on your team I was talking to in real life saying like, "Oh, we're listening to podcasts on the way in about what happened in the code base yesterday." Like good way to just digest content while I'm in the car or on the train or whatever you might be doing. But no, that one's awesome.
Yeah, we've experimented with that a lot. So what you might be talking about is for a different product. which is an AI coding agent. Someone on the team basically used the same tech to look through all the code base changes that have been made over the past 24 hours. And I was actually listening to one of them this morning because I was giving a demo to someone, and it'll say like, oh man, team's been busy, 17 major changes last night. Like, let's get into it. And it also will, at least, in our internal version, it'll name the specific people who made the change, which is kind of fun. It's like a team bonding thing. So yeah, there's the audio format, I think, has so much more potential even beyond what we have right now.
We agree. There's a lot of people, like big uptick recently in folks building voice agents with free play. It's all kinds of use cases. A lot of it's customer support, but we're seeing more and more stuff shift. I had my first experience recently too, where, I actually asked the agent on the phone, I was like, wait a second, this is awkward. Are you a human or an AI? And like it fessed up that it was an AI. But I got called, by a vendor, and it was not a human. So yeah, I think it's going to be powerful. Tell us what else like you're working on that is exciting. Like I think you're kind of maybe we were talking about Jules, but it would just be cool to like ground. You all do so much. Like what is a couple other projects you'd want to tell us about? And then maybe we can like shift into talking about some of your team, like how you all work.
Awesome. Yeah, other things we work on. So we work on a pretty wide variety if you look at the whole Google Labs portfolio.
I was amazed by how big the list is on your portfolio page. It's big.
Yeah, it's definitely big. My work's, of course, a subset of that. Right now, I am actually spending a lot of time on some of our AI coding work, and so I can tell you about a couple of them. One is Jules, which I just mentioned. That's an AI coding agent, and that one has been super interesting to work on because we have this. Kind of theory that I think a lot of folks share, that we want to figure out how to help developers move from, leveraging their own smarts and, code completion smarts and things like that, to actually being more of an orchestrator and being able to look across the code base and changes that need to happen, and also be a lot more proactive about updating the code base over time. And so right now, Jules is very focused on this space of asynchronous and parallel agent work. And what that means is you can basically hand off a task to Jules and say, hey, I have this bug. Can you take a crack at this? And you can do that for like 5 bugs at once, which is awesome. So we've been getting really good feedback on that one, and I think that has a lot of room to grow. That one we launched in a very small trusted tester back in December, and then it's now in like global general availability as of May.
And I know, yeah, our team grabbed it. You released it at a conference, started using it right away, and had impressive results. We're like always trying out the new stuff. Another big one that I know that you all shipped was Stitch, like that made a bunch of waves more in the visual space. Like, tell me more about that one.
Yeah, so this one's awesome where even though, I said, oh, I've been focused on AI coding, Stitch is one of those products that leverages a bunch of AI code work, but the way it comes off to the end user is 100% approachable for someone who has never seen a single line of code. So what Stitch does is you can basically make a request for a design just in plain text. Like you can say, design me an app for recording this podcast with Ian, but I want it to be special because I want, there to be a bunch of interactive, goofy things we can put on our faces during the podcast or whatever. And it will basically design the screens for you, and then you can iterate on it. You can also do things like change the theme of the screens that you see. So you can like instantly change the colors and, swap back and forth, which can be a little bit harder in a lot of tools. And the impetus for this was, hey, it's awesome. And we're very passionate about enabling developers to move a lot faster with AI. What are some of the things that we could make literally 1,000 times easier with AI, even for folks who aren't developers? And if you think about, obviously there's been tons of amazing advances in like the UX space. Figma certainly makes it much easier to design screens than, way in the past. And that's awesome. But now we're starting to think about, hey, if you want to, like, let's say you and I start brainstorming business ideas on this podcast, how could we go in the course of 5 minutes from just abstractly talking about something to actually having real output? And that's what Stitch does. So I'm very excited about that. It also lets you like grab the HTML if you happen to be a developer, but you don't need to check it out if you're not.
It's a good story. Like putting these three together, you all are doing a bunch of different stuff for a bunch of different audiences. Natural at Google scale. You all are lucky you get to play that wide. But I'm curious like how you see it all fitting together. Like, is there like a way that you'd extrapolate from all this kind of work in terms of like what does it mean for people as we're all thinking about the way AI is going to impact our work and lives?
Yeah, I'm smiling because you sound like you recently attended one of our team meetings or something. I'm sure you and most of your audience knows like the lean startup methodology and like the build, measure, learn loop. And so we talk about both that build, measure, learn loop and the kind of entirety of the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, and those thinking about like how do we play across that whole spectrum, both for folks who are tech adjacent and folks who are developers, is a big topic of conversation because our belief is that AI, it's already starting, right? AI is going to affect every step of that, but not just individually. Actually, as a cycle, it's going to really accelerate. And we're already seeing a lot with this, some of which I can talk about and some of which I can't. But if I think about like in the long term, what would we want to enable? Like, yeah, we want to help you come up with the initial idea for your new startup and visualize it. We want to help you actually bring that to life. We want to help you maintain it and improve the product excellence and hear from real users. Like, once you get some real scale, like with NotebookLM, for example, we have so much kind of social chatter about Notebook that's incredibly valuable, but also literally impossible for one person to digest. So, how are we going to take that information and translate that into improving the product? And you can see how the loop kind of goes on hyper speed, which could be interpreted as a little bit intimidating or overwhelming, but I actually think it's super exciting, and it also will take away, frankly, a lot of the tedious stuff that folks aren't as excited about, anyways. Like we all want to focus on what are we building next? How could we make it real? What would it look like? How would we make this happen? Yeah, we're very excited about that, and I do see how over time some of these things might have more connectors into each other than they currently do, and connectors into other Google products and non-Google products as well.
The whole stack is what I just heard you say. But yeah, no, that resonates, right? Like if you go, I might have been talking off your notes from the all hands. If you go look at the free play homepage, this is how like we talk about the world, right? Like how do you run the whole build, test, learn loop, build, measure, learn loop with AI products because it has changed so much. And then we're doing that tactically with product development teams. You're talking about at a meta level, how do we help you like literally do all the parts of that work? Sounds like make sense of social feedback about your product, which is awesome. But I mean, it's like a good transition maybe for the builders, like people listening to this podcast are generally working on these kinds of products themselves. I would love to shift to, how you have actually approached the building, running teams, like, being effective working in this space and across a whole bunch of modalities. Like, I think you have a pretty unique set of insights from touching so many different kinds of projects. One of the big ones that's like, popular in our world as a topic and a question and like a burning problem that a bunch of folks need to solve is like evals or, how do we like hill climber metrics and build a better product? And I did like listen to some of your past stuff. I know you mentioned on another podcast, like you said something about, the last 20% is like really the hardest part. I think everybody that's trying to build production grade AI products feels the same way. What like could you tell us about just like how you think of evals at this point in 2025, what you've learned and, what advice you might have for others?
Yeah. First, I'll tell you one very low tech thing that I've learned about evals, which is the first eval set should just be a spreadsheet shared in the team of, categorized by use cases and some examples that you probably did manually. And the reason I say that is because sometimes folks skip ahead to let's formalize the eval process and make sure this is running smoothly. And then you can realize a month, maybe 6 months later, that you've been optimizing for the wrong thing. And that, for example, a team could show, oh, look how much better we're doing on our evals. Whereas your product manager, your marketer, your leadership executive could say, the product experience sure doesn't seem,
Yeah.
37% better. What's going on
Yeah.
here?
Look, we're
And
moving some metrics that aren't actually connected to
yeah.
quality.
Yeah. So step one for a lot of our teams has been the very basic Google sheet. And then just having a discussion of, hey, are we actually optimizing for the right things here? Are these the categories of use cases we care about? How would we know that we've kind of hit on the right ones? So I think of the first set of the first sheet of evals as actually being a part of the product strategy. And when you nail that down, all of a sudden, making your eval set bigger or deeper becomes a lot easier.
Yep.
So that's at least my best practice there. We do, as I'm sure
Hmm.
most teams do, focus on, hey, given an eval set that we all believe in, what's kind of the snapshot or scorecard slide that we're all oriented toward? And for a couple of our teams, that's actually the first slide in our product review deck is our eval scorecard. And the reason it's first is not only because we need to talk about it every week or 2 weeks or whatever, but also because it's a message to the team of, honestly, nothing else matters if your product does not reliably serve the use cases that you've promised. And so it's very helpful to have that. And we usually follow that up with a couple slides that actually bring some color to it. So, for example, it could be that, hey, your overall, score, whatever, is at 63%. But if you break that down, you're actually rocking it on one subset of your use cases, but you have a long way to go on another. And so we'll do a lot of we'll actually match user quotes that we get from research or from social with what we're seeing in the eval set to show like, hey, we know this use case is an issue. Here's a couple examples of people complaining about it on X or whatever. And here's the project that's aligned to that. So that's like a little bit of how we think about it. And then one other comment I'll make on this depends, what type of product you're working on, but for a lot of products, there, especially like in the AI coding space, there are external or like public benchmarks that folks talk about, and I think these serve a lot of purpose and they have a lot of value.
Hmm.
And they are not an eval set that your team made for your product. And so what can also happen is this drift towards maximizing, how you're looking in some sort of external ranking or how you compare against some public effectively eval set. And that's not, like, they didn't make it just for you. And so one of the things that we've started doing more of is actually evolving the eval set as we see user behavior. So whereas a public benchmark or kind of an ad hoc eval set makes sense at first, eventually we can say, hey, our users are almost always working with an existing code base, or they're almost always vibe coding, or whatever it is for your user behavior. And then your eval set becomes lopsided in a good way because it's lopsided towards what people are actually using. And I think that
Yeah.
I think that's going to change a lot in the industry to not relying quite as much on some of these public benchmarks.
All that's gold. I'm sure people listening will love it and replay it. There's to recap to you a few things that you're saying, because I think we talk about this with folks all the time, and it's amazing how much the answer you just gave is similar to like anybody who's been deploying this stuff at scale. But counterintuitive for a lot of folks, you started with just like manually put together some examples and talk about them as humans, right? Like,
Even at
this.
Google, even at a big company.
Right. I think like so many teams are tempted to think like, oh, we're not automating this enough. I was talking to somebody the other day, um, VP of product at a big public company, and he was basically saying like, we struggle with this problem. it feels like we're supposed to be automating all of it, but the best upside comes from people looking at the data. Like, are we doing it wrong? I'm like, nope. That's the story with everybody still. So, but then like you move on to like, well, every product review meeting starts with our scorecard. So like you are like depending on them once you have the right metrics. And then the last part was just like, yeah, I think everybody's trying to figure out how to talk about this stuff because I think when people say the word evals, it's kind of like the word agent these days. It's like, what do you mean? Do we mean, you know, public benchmarks, NMLU code benchmarks? Do we mean product specific evals? Are we talking about running them online or offline? Is this a test set or is this production, analysis? I feel like we need better words for it, but pretty clear, like, yes, you need product specific evals. Maybe the benchmarks are a distraction if you're building something for customers. Thank you for that. Anything else you'd add there?
Uh, I think I think that's it. Like, I would just say, like, start by keeping it simple. And then I guess the biggest thing that makes us change our eval sets, maybe that's what I would add, is if when you use the product, it's just not matching to what your eval says. Like that to me is the trouble sign. Or when you talk to a customer and you're boasting about how well this part of it works, and they're saying like that's not really what we're seeing. That's very like pay attention to that is what I would say.
Tell us more about like just how you're running your teams. I think you got it. One of those things there, or several actually, like just kind of what your process looks like. You talked about, starting with your scorecard review. But a lot of listeners are thinking about like, how do we set up our teams for success? How do we operate? Maybe some of our old sprint cadences don't make sense when we're working on, AI products in the same way. I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out how to incorporate things like evals, but maybe just like at the top, this world's moving really fast. How do you like think about team culture and like keeping up with everything that's happening with AI?
Okay, so I would say of all the things I've worked on in the past, which includes a lot of emerging tech like computer vision and AR and VR, by far AI has the most FOMO around it, even for folks probably like you and me who think about this literally all day and have it in the job title and have it in the product description. I think the first thing is yes, learn all that you can and know that you will never feel like you're totally on top of everything. We do have some ways we think about it within labs that kind of help people make sure that they're getting exposure to the new things that matter, even while they're heads down on a launch or something like that. First, actually, the easiest thing to help with building culture, in my opinion, is bringing the right people in from the beginning. And so I think this is pretty generalizable from labs to startups to companies that are thinking about, evolving towards being more AI forward. But we really look for folks who are experimenting and building in their spare time. That doesn't mean they have to have started a startup or, launched some big thing on Product Hunt or something like that. But it means that they kind of naturally are just interested in, oh yeah, I was having a coffee with Ian and he showed me this thing and I tried it last night. We look for folks like that. And then
Yeah.
the other thing that's very helpful and I've felt like this is really nice for individuals too, is that folks who can connect across different domains are really valuable. And so I talk to a lot of friends who sometimes feel like, well, gosh, I know my industry or my business really well, but I'm feeling like a little behind on actually not just learning about the AI stuff, but implementing it in my business. And there's a real power from folks who are dot connectors. So we look for those and we also try to build that up. I'll give you just a really quick example there. One of the early folks on NotebookLM is this guy named Steven Johnson, who's amazing. He is not necessarily who you would expect a big tech company to hire. His background is being an author and speaker and writer on a bunch of technology shifts, but he's not, traditionally a product builder or an engineer or something like that. But
Yeah.
we originally brought him into labs before we even had NotebookLM. He helped create it because he was just thinking about how could AI change how people understand information and then produce something out of it. So in his case, he was producing a lot of writing out of it. But this is where, someone if you're very interested and you have domain expertise in something, marrying those things together is super promising. Okay, let me talk a little bit more tactically too about like how do you kind of like stay up to speed on all this stuff and work together. So we actually have a lot of kind of internal cadences in labs to help people get exposed to new things. So we have weekly sessions where folks will share prototypes that they've built, but not just the prototypes, but actually how they built those.
Yeah.
And so whether or not those turn into products, there's this really nice information sharing. We also bring in a lot of guest speakers, which I'm sure a lot of other companies do as well. Often for us, those are actually guest speakers from inside Google. So sometimes we'll bring in like a Google DeepMind researcher. Sometimes it will be someone from the outside, but we try to think about as many information sharing forums as we can. We do hackathons and things like that at the Google level and also at the labs level, also at the team level for specific teams. The other thing we do, which sounds in a way like the opposite of everything I just said, but is super important, is we have something we call launch mode, which I think was originally coined by a woman that I've never met named Vivian, who had been at Google for a long time. And every time we go into major launch modes, my manager, who leads labs and also the Gemini app, basically sends out a note with what this woman Vivian had originally written that talks about how, hey, as you're leading up to a major launch, you should be launching smaller things all the time, but a major launch,
Yeah.
you've got to focus on taking care of yourself, canceling extraneous stuff kind of mercilessly, spending the time on things outside of work that matter to you so you don't burn out, being really methodical about how you are approaching the launch as opposed to, kind of crazy mode. And so I will say we go through almost like cycles in labs, and there are times where being exposed to all the cool stuff is amazing, and that's most of the time. And then for a smaller set of time, it's great to be really focused and just say like, hey, eye on the prize, let's get this thing out there. And then I'll be the one doing the share about how we launched this thing and what technology we used.
People love these stories. I think the launch mode stuff resonates, but I think more than anything, like what you're talking about at the beginning, where just everybody's getting hands-on and building and trying stuff. Like it's the only way I've found to keep up these days, and it's been so much fun. I think especially like you and I both have backgrounds in product leadership. PMs are famous for spending time in a lot of meetings. It's been cool to just like have so many new tools to actually build things and be productive and like try to create something rather than talk about it. And I know a lot of folks are, learning quickly that way, and it feels like the only way to keep up. So that's cool that you all do it that way too. You did talk a bunch about like just people with different backgrounds, connecting dots. One of the things that comes up a lot in our world is like, who's doing this work? We all have the old mapping of traditional roles in a software org, got engineering and data science and design and product management. Then in this like new world of generative AI, there are new responsibilities, right? We've got, prompt engineering and evals and, domain level QA, and like the role matrix is getting all screwy. I'm just curious how you think about like in your org, PM, design, research, like what are other non-engineering roles doing on these AI projects, and how is it different from maybe what those roles looked like 2-3 years ago?
I think it's pretty different from what it looked like 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that in the next year, it's going to look even more different. I think of these roles as always having been Venn diagrams, but originally very loosely overlapping. So, like the PM and engineering role have some overlap, but it's not that significant. Same with PM and UXR or whatever. now it seems like those Venn diagram overlaps are actually getting a lot bigger, which, as you mentioned earlier, of hey, it's cool as a PM, like you can actually build this stuff on the side instead of trying to convince somebody else to build it for you. Um, that I think is really exciting. Again, all the stuff that's exciting can also be intimidating, right? Like that's just reality. But I think for folks who embrace it, it's awesome. And so what we're seeing is not only things like, oh, PMs really digging into eval sets or really digging into prompt engineering, or for example, like UX researchers making much more specific product recommendations because they are going through Discord and analyzing the Discord feedback in NotebookLM or that sort of thing. But we're
Yeah, our
also
designers keep sending us PRs, or like, our design lead keeps saying, like, I built it, like, here's the prototype, which is fun.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we're seeing too is especially with the vibe coding stuff. I'm not saying, folks who are not engineers are shipping production ready, Google products or something, but they are building the first prototypes and they're certainly like sending over PRs for features and changes and things like that. And I think that I guess like the for folks who haven't started doing this yet, it can feel like, oh my gosh, what? Like, oh, I'm supposed to create the first version of this? Like, what do you mean? But it's kind of shocking how much progress you can make, one. And even if you weren't able to integrate the Google Maps API to do the thing that you wanted or whatever, you can get it to a place where other people understand your ideas a lot better. So I think we're going to see a ton more role overlap. And actually, if you think about a lot of the roles that we are or roles we're trying to fill right now, we maybe in a cliche way say we're looking for unicorns, but uh, really what we mean is looking for folks who do have the overlap of, for example, like design and technical skills, or PM and prototyping. And now that's like super accessible. You don't actually need to be cross disciplinary in some sort of like education sense.
I think this is the way the world's going. Um, yeah, I think there's all this conversation, especially in product circles right now, about, you know, if you can't build the prototype anymore and show people what you have in mind, you're going to be at a disadvantage moving forward. And I know a lot of folks are working through like how to keep up with that.
Yeah, how do you think folks are feeling about that? Because I do, even in that question, like you're going to be behind, I do think a lot of folks are nervous right now of, oh, how do I show that I'm capable of this? It can be scary when basically your job description changes pretty rapidly.
Every person I've talked to about it in like a product management role has expressed some version of I feel nervous. There's a group of them that are super excited, that are leaning in and, building with different tools and, feel like there's some, superpower that they have now that they didn't have before, and still feel nervous because like so much is changing so quickly and they see it. And then I think there's a whole bunch of folks that feel like, we're stuck in our day to day, got to hit our OKRs. My leadership hasn't asked me to work on any of this stuff yet. Where am I going to find the time to keep up? And um, I think there's a split, right? With people that are like getting space to spend time on this stuff, and the people that aren't. I think everyone's seeing how much it's going to matter.
Hey, just some unsolicited advice on this one. As a manager, now, of course, I'm biased because I work in, an AI product area, but as a manager, probably really nice to hear someone say, hey, is it cool if I carve out, an hour and a half every Friday morning where, my pings are off, I'm not in meetings, and I'm focused on experimenting with these tools. And by the way, my first experiment will be related to this project. And, I'll do a share with everyone about what I learned or whatever. I think there are some ways to kind of build it in to your job if you can. We certainly try to do that here. The other thing I'm seeing more of kind of across the industry is folks, even who are like mid-level or senior that are managers, trying really hard to carve out IC time for themselves. And this is something I do too, where I think there's a real advantage if you are managing people to making sure that you also have that IC time to really devote to building something yourself. Because that's something I think is going to be really matter like in whatever someone's next job is or next company is.
What other high alpha advice do you have? You got any other points of advice you'd want to share with builders that you've just learned from the way you all operate?
One, we were talking earlier about what does a launch mode look like, and I think maybe to this point of hey, it can feel really frantic and all hands on deck before something launches. I do think my manager has made this point before that memories are made during launch mode, and a lot of the things that feel hard or you can't believe it's the night of launch and you thought you'd be having beers with your coworkers, but instead you're in some kind of war room handling the spiking traffic and the bug and that sort of thing. I would say, honestly, that stuff's so much fun, even though it's very stressful in the moment. And if I think about like how to build team culture, but also how to get a lot of like personal enjoyment for in your role, that's something I would just pay a lot of attention to. I'm thinking specifically when I gave that example of there was a team of mine that was launching something, and because there were a bunch of other associated launches, there actually was like literally a happy hour to celebrate this big set of launches. But one of my teams was in a war room, and not just because it was the right thing to do, but also because honestly, it was more fun and more exciting. I headed right over to the war room, and I have really good memories from those kinds of experiences. So, and also you learn a lot about all the things you need to do differently next time, and kind of doing those retrospectives afterwards of like what are all the things that went wrong also just like serves you so well. And I haven't avoided all problems, but I've certainly avoided some having done that many, many times.
You're making me laugh. I'm just thinking back to these stories in my world too. We had a big launch one time when I was at Twitter, and one of our most public, like famous Sev Zeros happened the night of our, planned launch, and we were all trying to solve for it. And I will never forget it, right? Like to the point of memories.
Yep.
What's like the inverse? If that's some advice about something to focus on, like for others building in this space, like any like good like dead ends or just like people wasted a bunch of time over here too often, words of advice or caution that you'd give to other folks?
Yeah, I would say I wish I wasn't admitting that I've made this mistake before, but I definitely have several times. If you're working on a product or a feature that hasn't actually made contact with the real world and with real users, um, teams can really swirl around that. And as much as you can scope down the thing to actually just get it out there and see how people are using it and then make decisions based off that, the better. I don't know that I want to be quoted on this per se, but I do at a foundational level believe that making the 70% right decision quickly is more valuable than making the 90% decision more slowly. Just because if you're 70% of the way there, as long as you will still make fast decisions, you can course correct pretty easily. Of course, there are big exceptions to that, right? For certain types of products or like high trust environments or whatever. But one of the things we've learned time and time again in labs is that while we have some intuition, certainly, about products and what people will use them for, people surprise us with all of the many, many ways that they are using these products. And often what we see them using actually significantly changes the product direction. And so that'd be my advice of just if your team feels like it's swirling and you don't have contact with the real world, that's a problem you can solve pretty easily.
I'm just kind of sincerely curious. I think about the kind of work you all do. It's global scale work most of the time. And so there's hearing you say that is interesting because I bet a bunch of folks feel this. Like there can be a tension if you think you're trying to ship quickly toward more incrementalism. And, if you want to do the big thing, takes longer, it's harder, you end up in the trap you're talking about. I know that you think about these kinds of dynamics. Like, how do you set that dial as a leader and with your teams around what's, the quick version versus the high impact thing? Just be curious to hear you think a little bit, I'm curious to know how you think about that more.
Okay, here's how I think about it. Fundamentally, for your product, at least in the AI space, I think you should be able to say why what you're offering is not, 10 or 20% better, but why it's like 100x better. And then ship whatever the most basic version of that is, which is different from, hey, ship like a tiny little step on the way there. Let me
Totally.
can I give you a really silly example of this that Google has not worked on? So I'm in like a
Okay.
Slack channel with a bunch of, it's like a women execs in tech group. And someone posted in the Slack channel that they had just gotten AI headshots. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but if you I haven't used it myself, but if you upload, I don't know, like 10 pictures or something of yourself, and pay whatever, $29, $39, you'll get back 20 or 50 headshots, right? And this person sent examples of her headshots, which varied from actually like excellent headshots all the way to just absurd things. But if you actually think about the value, and so what I would say, probably not the highest quality product right now, right? Like there were some in there that we were just cracking up over. They were absurd. But if you think about the fundamental value of that tool, all of a sudden, instead of this woman having to find a professional photographer, pick out a spot to do it, maybe spend a long time picking out an outfit that's not going to look weird on camera with patterns or I don't know, whatever the issue is. Then block off some amount of time during her day to travel there and do the photos. And then, by the way, pay, I don't know, $500 or whatever. Instead,
At least.
she uploaded 10 pictures, both laughed and got a new LinkedIn profile picture for $30 or whatever. And
That's
so
cool.
to me, as silly as that example is, that's a really good example of they're solving something that feels like a significant leap forward from today's experience, right? But they ship that in a basic form. And I think that's the right call. And like, they're going to get way better. And I'm sure if you use it in 6 months, like 90% of the photos are going to be awesome. But that's the way I would think about it. Now, obviously, Google is maybe tackling a different category of, user challenge than AI headshots. But I kind of think about it still in an analogous way.
I'm assuming you're not going to send us one of those headshots to use for promoting this podcast, but if you want to and be brave, I'm sure people would get a kick out of it.
I haven't done it, but you know what? After telling that story, it's reminding me in the next week, I'm going to get my AI headshots. I'll
go check it out too.
You, but I may not let you share them.
Depends on the quality of the output. Kelly, I know we're going over time. I really appreciate it. It's been great having you on. I just want to give you like one more chance, before we say goodbye. If people want to follow along with your work, they want to check out what you're up to at Labs, like what's the best way to do that?
Awesome. Yeah. I post the most on LinkedIn. So you can just search for Kelly Schaefer. And then I'm also Kelly Schaefer on X, and love seeing what people are building, and also really love hearing feedback on our products. So anybody should feel very comfortable sending any of that feedback my way. And this was so fun, Ian. Thanks for hanging out.
Awesome. I had a lot of fun too. Thanks for doing it. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode of Deployed, the AI Product Podcast. I'm Ian Cairns, CEO and co-founder of FreePlay. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you did, we'd love to hear about it. Your reviews mean a lot and they help other listeners. So give us a like, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if something stood out to you in the episode, or if you've got feedback or ideas for a future episode, or if you simply just want to learn more what we're up to at FreePlay, shoot me a note. I'm Ian at freeplay.ai. You can also find me on Twitter @Cairns. Thanks so much for listening.